What's up YouTube? It's the Vintage Cube Chef, back with another video. This video is going to cover everything you need to know for the Arena powered cube that's coming out in a few days. Today, Magic the Gathering Arena released the updated card list for the cube, which includes all the changes they made since the last iteration in October of 2025. Usually when they do this, they post a comparison list of what cards went in and what cards went out, and they chose not to do that this time. This can make it a little bit difficult to figure out what exactly has changed as opposed to just looking at the full list. The good news is there's a lot of resources available for being able to filter this, and a few wonderful people on the internet have already started compiling a compare and contrast list. This video is going to be going over what I have been able to find, comparing and contrasting what's different, and my advice about what's changed since our first iteration of the cube. If you haven't played the first iteration of the cube, or you've never played a vintage cube at all, I'm going to give a quick description overall of what vintage cubes entail. If you're already pretty familiar, feel free to skip ahead to the point I'm going to mark right here, because that's where I'll start talking about the changes and my advice for drafting this version of the cube. Alright, now that all the experts have moved on, let's talk real quick about what a vintage cube is. Vintage cube means that every card from Magic's history is available to be played in the cube or put into the cube environment. I actually have a vintage cube of my own, and for most high-powered or powered cubes, this means including all 5 of the moxes, which are colorless artifacts that cost 0 and tap immediately for a color, Time Walk, Ancestral Recall, and Time Twister. There are also a couple other cards that most people would bucket into power, like Mana Crypt and Soul Ring, but it's important to know that every cube is slightly different. For the Arena High Powered Cube specifically, they chose not to include any Arena-only cards. All cards in this cube could be collected out in the wild and formed into their own cubes. I actually have spent the last couple of months developing my own vintage cube, which is what I thought I would be working on today since I just received my last few cards I need to sleeve it up and officially have it be done. However, I was just too excited to talk about the Arena High Powered Cube as it's a format that I greatly enjoyed the first time around. If you've never played any of these type of cubes, you should go in knowing that winning early, quickly, and with little interaction from your opponent is a feature, not a bug of the cube. This is not a set where you really get to feel like you necessarily played Magic in every game, and part of it is admiring just how powerful Magic the Gathering can be when you're willing to play with every card ever printed. There are multiple turn 1 combos that essentially win the game, or actually win the game if not interacted with, and even if you have interaction, sometimes your opponent just has it, and that's something you have to brush off and go next. It's actually why I've enjoyed playing best of 3 better, because knowing what's in your opponent's deck can allow you to sideboard and give you better chances even if they're going for that type of strategy. An interesting note is that in the first version of this cube, aggro decks dominated because of how fast they were and the fact that many combo decks rely on getting all of their pieces, and that variance can fold under pressure. If you are looking to get into this format as a first time player of any form of high powered cube, just know it has one of Magic's steepest learning curves. This isn't to dissuade you, as I think Vintage Cube and high power formats are incredibly fun, but just know what you're getting into, especially since it's not a small cost to play on Arena. As a free to play drafter who just finished my Avatar Bronze to Mythic run, these cubes on Arena can be a pressure point for whether or not I'm able to do runs in the future, so I will have to keep that in mind with how much I play it. Once again, one of the reasons I built my own vintage cube was so that I could play it whenever I wanted and not be at the mercy of Magic the Gathering Arena or other providers to be able to play the format I enjoy. Alright, now we've covered the basics, so let's talk a little bit about what's different. This Word document will be available in my Discord after this video has been posted, as it includes my collection of all the cards that are going in or out of the cube. I wouldn't be too surprised if sometime in the next few days they post an official list of what went in and what went out like they normally do, but this is normally when they would have posted it, so it's possible they don't intend to do that for this time around. It's color coded based off the color of the cards, and I've bolded cards that I think are really important to know have either entered or left the cube from the previous time. If you played the Arena High Powered Cube the first time around, you know that Boros aggro was incredibly strong. In their explanation for why they made changes, one of the things they talked about was weakening the overall power level of Boros aggro. Specifically, they didn't get rid of some of the strongest cards, instead making the depth of the color for aggro a little bit weaker. Essentially, this means if multiple people are trying to play some version of Boros aggro, they're going to have to actually fight for cards to complete their deck. They will not confidently be able to get the 24 or so cards they need to make sure they can play a full deck of all aggro. This was absolutely the case in the first time around, as boros was known to be the best color, heavily contested, and still seeing an incredibly high win rate. Two other things to note that are pretty important. Final Fantasy and Lord of the Rings bring powerful staples to the format that were not previously in the cube. This includes Orcish Bowmasters for the combo decks, the One Ring for artifact decks and control decks, 5 land cyclers for each color, which overall makes it easier to splash, hit your land drops, and not flood, and a few spicy Final Fantasy cards that we still haven't really gotten to play a ton with in most versions of other people's cubes. It's also important to note they removed 2 core strategies. Dark Depths is no longer in the cube, nor are any of the cards that supported it, like Crop Rotation, Thespian Stage, and Vampire Hexmage. Oddly, Channel is still in the cube, but it's very important to note that they've removed most of the payoffs for playing an early Channel, like all 3 of the big Eldrazi. With those general statements out of the way, let's look at the cards that actually changed. For new cards coming in that I think are relevant to call out, Samwise the Stout-Hearted is a card I particularly greatly enjoy. It's a 2-mana 2/1 with Flash that picks a card that went to your graveyard this turn from the battlefield and returns it to your hand. It easily synergizes with fetch lands early and as a pseudo protection spell later. Ultima from Final Fantasy is also being added. This is especially relevant because of how strong artifacts tend to be in the cube. Ultima, destroying all artifacts, is a good way to reset the board after your opponent played a ton of early game mana rocks or tinkered for high power payoffs. For white, a lot of the big cards are what was removed. Guide of Souls, being one of the highest win rate cards of the first iteration of the cube, is not coming back a second time. Nor is the 1-drop in Kythian, the 2-drop in Luminarch Aspirant, and the incredibly powerful 2-drop in Voice of Victory. Voice of Victory in particular, I think, is the most important card that has been cut from white in this cube, as it single-handedly defined control matchups, making it so your opponent essentially couldn't counter any of your spells. A few other important notes are the 3 bolded 3-drops that have been cut. In particular, Sanguine Evangelist is an incredibly valuable card to the token strategies, which is no longer going to be in the cube. For blue, 3 big cards have been added. Lorien Revealed seems innocuous as an island cycler that just draws 3 cards for 5 mana. But in the blue decks that generate a lot of mana, being able to go get an island early to smooth your draws and draw cards in the late game once you have all the mana you need is incredibly impactful in most iterations of Vintage Cube right now. Wan Shi Tong has also been playing incredibly well. If you haven't been playing much of Avatar, you may not know this, but there is now a hate card for when your opponent searches your library in blue that has flash and gets bigger every time they do it. Astrologian's Planisphere is a card I also quite like. It's an artifact that enters and equips itself to a 1/1 hero that says every time you cast an instant or sorcery or draw your 3rd card, put a 1/1 counter on an equipped creature. In many cases, this is a single card win condition that needs to be respected. Important cards leaving the cube in blue include Dress Down as a way to counter enter the battlefield effects for the cheaty decks, and Sink into Stupor, a dual-faced card that was both a land and a way to return something to its owner's hand. Both of these cards were important tempo plays, and I think their impact will be noticed. Black only saw 2 changes, 1 card in, Orcish Bowmasters, and 1 card out, in Vampire Hexmage, that I think are incredibly relevant. As a general statement, Black got a lot faster in terms of how quickly it gets on the board, and more aggressive overall. Troll of Khazad-dûm, being a cycler that puts itself in the graveyard and a good reanimation target, definitively makes reanimation decks a lot better in this version of the cube. The other big cycler in Oliphant in red, which is usually paired with reanimation decks because of how quickly it puts cards in the graveyard and how good its reanimation targets can be, is another big win for reanimation strategies in this version of the cube. Along with the previous stated Oliphant, red also is getting 2 more hate cards for artifacts in Ember of Shieldbreaker and Suplex. It's also losing a ton of incredibly impactful aggro cards, making it a better fit for controlling strategies or reanimation strategies, as opposed to having a plethora of fill-in-the-blank Boros cards that got on the board early and punished opponents for trying to do other strategies. Most notably, Goblin Bombardment leaving means that creature-based strategies are now once again susceptible to board clears, and you can no longer flip a Johnny the turn he comes down by sacrificing the cat he creates to Goblin Bombardment. Also, the two 3 drops, Death Greeter's Champion and Gut True Soul Zealot that I've highlighted, are incredibly powerful cards that I think will be quickly noticed are missing. Green saw a lot of changes, and that's mainly because one of its core archetypes, which was caring about lands for dark depths, and its other core archetype of channeling into big dumb things, both got removed for this iteration of the cube. Almost all of its changes are to fill in the blanks from those cards leaving, and it seems like they added just a bunch of stuff for green. I'm not quite sure how this will impact it, but I do know that Delighted Halfling is a big pickup as it makes it so that you can splash easier in green for powerful legendary creatures and planeswalkers and spells. Most notably, playing a Delighted Halfling on turn 1 means you can play an uncounterable Uro, Nadu, or Oko on turn 2, which is incredibly strong in this cube. This gold section is reserved for artifacts, lands, and multicolored cards. One of the big things they did to make room for all of these new cards was eliminate 5 of the talismans, which were essentially replaced by the 5 land cyclers. Here you can also see where they cut the lands for the Dark Depth strategy and the big payoffs for Channel. In general, the cards they put in my opinion, aren't too exciting outside of Vivi for the blue-red spells deck, Sin as another reanimation or cheaty target, Palantir for the artifact decks, and most importantly off of Mishra's Workshop, and the One Ring as a huge payoff for any control or artifact deck looking to draw cards. Honestly, the One Ring goes about in every single deck it can go in, because in aggro decks it even lets you draw to refill your hand quickly and protect you from big payoffs your opponents might have played. Now that we've covered the cards, I want to give a quick opinion about how I think the format will shape out with these changes. Most notably, I think Boros aggro seeing the cuts it did will significantly damper how strong it is. However, many of Boros aggro's best cards are still in the cube. I wouldn't be surprised if it remains the top played deck and one of the top win rate decks in the format. However, I think Boros aggro will now no longer be a fully contested deck in the format in every draft. This may mean that when you do see it, you will actually see stronger versions of the deck, as the decks people make won't be as contested. That said, I think the biggest winner of these changes is the reanimation decks and strategies. Getting the land cyclers as a way to increase your reanimation targets and weakening Boros aggro both result in reanimation and cheaty strategies for creatures being much more powerful. It's also important to note that blue and blue artifact strategies essentially saw no nerfs, and it was a very strong deck in the format the first time around. I have multiple very strong decks built around Tinker, Tolarian Academy, and other synergy cards and pieces for the blue artifacts, and they're getting some pretty big pickups in Planisphere, Palantir, and the One Ring. As is true for most versions of Vintage Cube, I think green is still going to be the weakest color, and I don't think it's particularly close. I was a little bit surprised with the cards they added, as they feel quite clunky and unsynergistic. Boomy in particular is a little bit surprising to me. Omnath Locus of Creation, which I didn't highlight here, in many ways was also a green card, as it was one of the main payoffs for being able to play many colors in green. It and other powerful big green creatures leaving the cube makes me wonder what exactly the intent is for most green decks outside of playing specifically green-blue time walk strategies, with cards like Oko, Tameo, and Uro. So that's everything we know so far about the new version of the Arena-powered cube. Thanks for watching this far, and let me know in the comments what you think the most powerful deck in the format will be. If you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you click the like button or subscribe to the channel, as these videos will be coming out often, especially with the Arena Cube right around the corner. More important than either of those things, though, I look forward to seeing you on the next one.